Rose's laugh was bitter,
What do you mean
far
it's
too
gone?
knowing for her
This
age.
can't be
Daddy doesn't do hair.
happening.
Daddy doesn't do anything like that. He pays people to do things. Diana separated Rose's hair into sections, her fingers working with the kind of attention that came from actually caring, not from being paid. What does your daddy do? Business, Rose said automatically, the word clearly rehearsed. Then quieter. Bad business, I think. People are always scared of him. Even the people who work for him look scared when he walks into a room. Are you scared of him? Rose considered this for a long moment while Diana began braiding. Not scared that he'll hurt me. Scared that. She trailed off, searching for words. Scared that he doesn't really see me. Like I'm just another thing he has to protect, like his cars or his house. Something valuable, but not real. Diana's throat tightened. She secured the end of the braid with the hair tie and gently turned Rose to face her. Tell me about your house. It's big, Rose said, her voice flat. Really big. 10 bedrooms, even though it's just me and Daddy. There's a pool I'm not allowed to use without supervision, but no one ever has time to supervise me. My room has everything, toys, books, clothes. Everything except. She looked down at her bandaged hands. It's quiet. Really, really quiet. Like a museum where you're not supposed to touch anything. Do you have friends who visit? Rose shook her head. Daddy says it's not safe. I go to school, but a car picks me up the second the bell rings.
No playdates. No sleepovers.
No birthday parties except the one today, and that was just... Her voice cracked. Just kids from my class who came because their parents made them. I could tell they didn't want to be there. Diana reached out and took Rose's hands in hers. What about your daddy? Does he eat dinner with you? Play games? Ask about your day. He's always working, Rose said, and there was no accusation in her voice, just a terrible acceptance. He comes home late. Sometimes I'm already asleep. In the morning, he asks if I did my homework and if I ate breakfast, and then he leaves again. On weekends, he has meetings. Sometimes he asks if I need anything, and I say no, because I have everything. She looked up at Diana, her dark eyes swimming with tears. I have everything except someone who wants to know what I'm thinking, or what I'm feeling, or what scared me at school, or what made me laugh. Diana pulled Rose into a hug, feeling the child's small body shake with silent sobs. Oh, sweetheart. You're nicer to me in 1 hour than my daddy's been in 1 year, Rose whispered against Diana's shoulder, and the words hit like a physical blow. You asked me questions. You listened to my answers. You fixed my hair like it mattered. Why did you do that?
You don't even know me.
Diana held Rose tighter, her own tears threatening to spill. Because you matter, Rose. Not because of who your father is or what he has. You matter because you're you. She pulled back slightly, brushing tears from Rose's cheeks with gentle thumbs. Can I tell you something? When I was your age, I lost my parents in a fire. I grew up in foster care, moving from house to house. And I learned something important. The people who had the most money, the biggest houses, the most stuff, they weren't always the people who knew how to love. Sometimes the people with the least gave the most because they understood what it felt like to have nothing. You understand, Rose said, not a question but a recognition. I understand that children need love more than they need provisions, Diana said. They need someone to see them, really see them, not as an obligation or a responsibility, but as a whole person with feelings and dreams and fears. You can give a child every material thing in the world and still let them starve emotionally. Rose was quiet for a moment, processing this. Do you think my daddy knows that? Diana thought about the man on the other end of the phone, the fear beneath the fury in his voice. I think maybe he's forgotten, she said carefully. Sometimes people armor their hearts so completely that they forget how to open them again, even to the people they love most. Can people remember? Rose asked, her voice small and desperately hopeful. Diana squeezed her hand. Yes, sweetheart. People can remember. Sometimes it just takes the right push, the right crisis, to crack that armor open. The text came through at 11:34 p.m. Martinez. Found the van. Warehouse district off Canal Street. 2 subjects in custody. Henry was moving before he finished reading, his driver already pulling the car around. The penthouse elevator couldn't descend fast enough. His reflection in the polished doors showed a man he barely recognized, shirt untucked, tie gone. The careful control that defined Henry Blackwell completely shattered. He looked like what he was, a father coming apart at the seams. The drive took 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. The warehouse was exactly the kind of place Henry's world operated in, shadows and concrete, far from streetlights and witnesses. His men had the 2 kidnappers zip-tied to metal chairs, their faces already showing the early signs of Martinez's persuasion techniques. Blood trickled from the scarred one's nose. The driver's eye was swelling shut. Henry walked in, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Both men's eyes widened in recognition and terror. They'd tried to take Henry Blackwell's daughter. They understood in that moment that they were dead men. The only question was how long it would take. "Where is she?" Henry's voice was barely above a whisper, more terrifying than any shout. The driver started crying immediately, words tumbling over themselves. "We didn't hurt her, I swear. We were just supposed to grab her and hold her leverage against you for the Riverside deal, but she—" Henry's fist connected with the man's jaw with a crack that echoed off concrete walls.
Where is she?
"She ran," the scarred one shouted, blood from his nose mixing with terror-induced spit. "She jumped out at a red light downtown, ran into the crowds. We tried to follow, but she's small, fast. She got away from us." Henry's world tilted. "When?" 8:30, maybe 8:40. Right when the storm started. "We looked, boss, I swear we looked, but she disappeared into the alleys and we couldn't." Henry didn't hear the rest. 8:30. Rose had been alone in the city for 3 hours. 3 hours in a storm that was currently battering the warehouse's metal roof like artillery fire. She was 7 years old, barely 45 pounds, wearing a party dress and ballet flats, neither of which would protect her from cold or rain or the 1,000 dangers lurking in city streets after dark. The rage that had sustained him, that had driven him through the last 4 hours, drained away like blood from a wound. What replaced it was pure, undiluted terror. His daughter was out there, lost, frightened, possibly hurt. She could be huddled in an alley. She could be hypothermic. She could have been picked up by someone worse than these idiots. She could be calling for him, crying for him, wondering why her father couldn't find her. "Sir?" Martinez's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What do you want us to do with them?" Henry looked at the 2 men and felt nothing. No rage, no desire for revenge, no satisfaction in their fear. They were irrelevant. Everything was irrelevant except finding Rose. "I don't care," he said flatly. "Do whatever you want. I need every available man on the streets. Now." He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he started making calls. "Check every shelter within a 5-mile radius of downtown. Every hospital, every police station, every fire station. Every business that's still open, diners, convenience stores, gas stations, hotels. Show her picture. Someone has to have seen her." His men scattered to their assignments, phones already out, the machinery of Henry's empire redirecting to a single purpose. Henry stood in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by the tools of violence and power that had defined his adult life, and realized with crushing clarity that none of it mattered. He'd spent 20 years building an empire. He controlled territories, influenced elections, commanded armies of men who'd kill on his word. He'd accumulated wealth most people couldn't comprehend, power that made politicians nervous, respect born of fear that cleared rooms when he entered. He believed this made him strong, made him successful, made him someone his daughter could be proud of. But Rose was alone in a storm, and all his power couldn't bring her home. All his money couldn't turn back time to 8:30 when she'd jumped from that van. All his control couldn't protect her from the very world he'd helped create, a world of shadows and violence where 7-year-old girls weren't safe even in party dresses. Henry thought of the drawing he'd found, close but far, and understood with terrible insight that Rose had run into a storm rather than wait for rescue. What did that say about how safe she felt with him? What did it say about their relationship that his daughter would rather take her chances with kidnappers and Rain than trust that her father would come? The phone in his hand suddenly rang, an unknown number cutting through his spiraling thoughts. Henry answered it without thinking, his voice raw and desperate in a way he hadn't allowed it to be in 15 years. "Who is this?" The woman's voice on the other end was steady despite an undercurrent of fear. "Mr. Blackwell, my name is Diana. I'm a waitress at the Starlight Diner on 5th and Morrison. Your daughter is here. She's safe. But she needs you." Henry's knees buckled. He caught himself against the wall, his vision swimming. "Rose? She's alive? She's okay. She's okay. Scared, some scrapes and cuts, but okay. She's right here with me." Sometimes we must lose everything to realize what truly matters. Henry had just lost everything, his control, his composure, his carefully constructed armor, and gained something infinitely more valuable, a chance. A second chance to be the father Rose needed instead of the fortress he'd built around her. "I'm coming," he said, already running for the car. "Don't let her go. Please. I'm coming right now." Diana had been staring at her phone for 5 minutes, the number glowing on the screen like a dare. Rose sat beside her in the booth, freshly braided hair and bandaged wounds, watching Diana with an expression that was equal parts hope and resignation. The child had clearly learned not to expect too much from adults. "Have you called this number before?" Diana asked softly. Rose nodded, her small fingers tracing patterns on the table. "Lots of times. From school, when I want to tell him something. When I'm scared or lonely, or just—" She trailed off, shrugging. "He never answers. His secretary does sometimes, and she says he's in a meeting. Or Thomas answers and says Daddy's busy, but he'll tell him I called." Diana's heart broke a little more. A child calling her father, wanting connection, and getting screened by employees. "Does he call you back?" "Sometimes. Later. And he asks if everything's okay, if I need anything. I always say no." Rose looked up, her dark eyes ancient. "Because he doesn't really want to know. He just wants to make sure nothing's wrong so he can go back to work." Diana reached out and smoothed a strand of hair behind Rose's ear. "Tonight's different, sweetheart. Tonight he's going to answer." "How do you know?" "Because tonight, you really need him. And sometimes people surprise us when it matters most." Diana wasn't sure she believed her own words, but she needed Rose to have hope. She took a deep breath and pressed the call button before she could overthink it further. The phone didn't even complete one ring. "Who is this?" The voice that answered was barely controlled chaos, command wrapped around desperation, authority cracking at the edges. This wasn't the voice of a man in a business meeting. This was the voice of a father in free fall. Diana's mouth went dry. She'd rehearsed this moment in her head, planned exactly what to say, but Henry Blackwell's raw urgency scattered every prepared word. "Mr. Blackwell," she managed, her voice steadier than her hands. "My name is Diana. I'm a waitress at the Starlight Diner on 5th and Morrison." "I don't," he started, impatience and confusion mixing with something that sounded like barely restrained violence. "Your daughter is with me." 5 words. That's all it took to stop whatever Henry Blackwell had been about to say. The silence on the other end was so complete Diana thought the call had dropped. "Mr. Blackwell?" "Rose?" His voice cracked completely on her name, the single syllable carrying 7 years of suppressed emotion. She's alive? She's okay. She's okay," Diana said, looking at Rose, who had gone completely still, tears streaming silently down her face at the sound of her father's voice. "Scared, some scrapes and cuts, but okay. She's right here with me." The sound that came through the phone might have been a sob or a laugh or both. "Put her on. Please, I need to hear her." Diana held the phone toward Rose, but the child shook her head violently, pressing herself back against the booth. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't talk to him. I'm too scared." Diana pulled the phone back. "Mr. Blackwell, she's not ready to talk yet. She's been through a lot tonight. But she's safe, and she needs you to come get her." "I'm coming." The scrape of movement, car doors, an engine roaring to life. Starlight Diner, 5th and Morrison. I'm 15 minutes away. Don't let her go. Please. The raw pleading in his voice was almost shocking from a man whose name inspired fear across the city. Don't let her leave. I'm coming right now. We'll be here, Diana promised. Is she hurt? What happened? Who took her? Questions poured out now. The dam broken. She can tell you herself when you get here. She's brave, Mr. Blackwell. She escaped on her own. She fought to survive. Diana watched Rose's expression shift at those words, watched the child sit a little straighter. She just needs her father now. 10 minutes, Henry said. I can be there in 10. Tell her, his voice broke again. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her I love her. Diana's eyes met Rose's. Did you hear that, sweetheart? Rose nodded, tears flowing freely now, her small hand pressed against her mouth as if holding in a lifetime of longing. Diana spoke into the phone again, her own voice thick with emotion. She heard you. We'll see you soon. She ended the call and set the phone on the table. Rose stared at it like it was a sacred object, this device that had finally connected her to her father in a way that mattered. He's really coming? He's really coming. And Rose. Diana took both of the child's hands in hers. He sounded terrified. Not angry. Not disappointed. Terrified that he'd lost you. That's love, honey. That's what love sounds like when it finally breaks through. Rose threw herself into Diana's arms, sobbing into her shoulder. Big, heaving cries that seemed to release years of loneliness and longing. Diana held her and rocked her gently, the way she wished someone had held her when she'd lost everything in the fire. Sometimes the bridges between broken worlds weren't built by the powerful or the wealthy or the connected. Sometimes they were built by a waitress in a diner at midnight, holding a crying child and betting everything on the hope that a father's armored heart could still remember how to break open. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the Starlight Diner, two souls waited together for the arrival of a third and the chance at redemption that only love could offer. The headlights cut through the rain first, 3 black SUVs pulling up to the diner with the aggressive precision of a military operation. Diana felt Rose tense against her. The child had finally fallen asleep 20 minutes ago, exhausted from crying and fear and the emotional release of being truly heard. Now she stirred as car doors slammed, as heavy footsteps approached. Diana's heart hammered. She'd made many questionable decisions in her life, but calling Henry Blackwell might be the one that got her killed. The diner door burst open with such force the bell tore free and skittered across the floor. 4 men entered first, weapons drawn, scanning the space with professional efficiency. And then Henry Blackwell filled the doorway. He was exactly what Diana had imagined and nothing like she'd expected. Tall, powerfully built, tattoos crawling up his neck and disappearing under his collar. His suit was expensive but disheveled, his hair wild from running hands through it. He had a gun in his right hand, held with the casual familiarity of someone who'd used it often. His face was a mask of barely controlled violence, his eyes scanning the diner for threats, for his daughter, for...
He saw them.
Rose curled against Diana in the corner booth, the waitress's arms protective around the sleeping child. And everything changed. The gun fell from Henry's hand, clattering against the floor. His face crumpled, the mask of power and control shattering like glass. He took 2 stumbling steps forward, and then his knees gave out. He hit the diner floor hard, his whole body shaking as sobs tore from his chest. Raw, broken sounds that came from somewhere deep and long buried. His men looked away, uncomfortable witnessing their boss unmade. But Diana couldn't look away. She was watching something sacred, a father's heart breaking open after years of being locked in ice. Rose's eyes flew open at the sound. For one moment, she stared at her father kneeling on the floor, weeping, and Diana saw the child process what she was seeing. Not the intimidating Mafia boss, not the distant provider, but a man who'd come completely undone at the thought of losing her.
Daddy.
Rose's voice was small, uncertain, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Henry's head snapped up, and the look on his face would haunt Diana for the rest of her life. Pure, desperate love mixed with crushing guilt.
Rose.
Baby, He didn't get to finish. Rose launched herself from the booth and ran to him, her small body colliding with his chest. Henry caught her and pulled her close, one hand cradling her head, the other wrapped around her back, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. He buried his face in her damp hair and wept harder, his whole body shaking with the force of it. "Daddy, you found me," Rose sobbed against his chest. "I knew you'd find me. I knew you'd come." "I'm sorry," Henry choked out, the words muffled but unmistakable. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I've been so far away. I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to." His voice broke completely. "I thought you'd be mad," Rose whispered. Henry pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her small face. Tears streamed down his tattooed cheeks unashamedly.
Mel.
"Rose, I was terrified. When I thought I'd lost you, when I thought I'd never get to tell you how much," he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you so much. More than anything. More than everything. And I've done such a terrible job of showing you." "You came," Rose said simply, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter clinging to each other in the middle of a nearly empty diner at 3 a.m, years of distance beginning to collapse. Diana watched through her own tears, her hand pressed to her mouth, witnessing the kind of transformation that proved people could change, that armor could crack, that love could win. Finally, Henry looked up and found Diana standing by the booth. He carefully stood, lifting Rose with him, keeping her close. He crossed to Diana, and she saw him clearly now, not a monster, not a criminal, just a broken father trying to figure out how to be whole. "You saved her," he said, his voice raw. "I don't know how to thank you." "I don't. Whatever you want, whatever you need." Diana shook her head, cutting him off gently. "She was already strong, Mr. Blackwell. She saved herself. She escaped, she ran, she survived. I just gave her a warm place to rest while she waited for you." Henry stared at her, this waitress with kind eyes who'd risked everything to protect a stranger's child. "How?" he asked finally. "How did you make her smile? How did you get her to talk to you, to trust you?" "I've had 7 years and he stopped, swallowing hard. "I've forgotten how to reach her." Diana thought about Rose's words, about the big empty house and the father who asked what she needed, but never what she felt. "I asked her what she felt, not what she needed," Diana said simply. "I listened to her heart, not her words. I sat with her instead of fixing her. I gave her my presence, not my solutions." Henry closed his eyes, absorbing this like a revelation. "Will you teach me?" The question came out quietly, humbly. "Will you teach me how to do that? How to be what she needs?" "Mr. Blackwell." "Henry, please." Diana looked at Rose, whose eyes were hopeful, and at Henry, whose armor was finally cracking enough to let light in. "Yes," she said. "I'll help you. Not because of who you are or what you can do for me, but because you're both trying. That's all that matters, that you're trying." 3 days later, Diana was wiping down tables at the end of her shift when the bell chimed. Henry walked in, holding Rose's hand. He looked different, still powerful, still intimidating, but softer somehow. And Rose looked lighter, less like she was carrying the weight of loneliness. "We brought you something," Rose said shyly, holding out a piece of paper. Diana took it with gentle hands. It was a drawing in crayon, a little girl and a tall man standing close together, holding hands. Between them, connecting them, was a woman with kind eyes. At the bottom, in Rose's careful printing, "Family finds you." Diana looked up, tears blurring her vision. Henry's eyes were bright too. "She wanted you to know," he said quietly, "that you're part of this now. Part of us. If you want to be." Diana thought about redemption, about how it wasn't erasing failures but learning from them, about how love wasn't weakness, but the strength that made everything else meaningful, about how sometimes the most broken people could help each other become whole. "Yes," she said, pulling them both into a hug. I wanna be. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving the city washed clean and full of possibility. Inside the Starlight Diner, a new family was being born, not through blood, but through choice, through compassion, through the courage to let broken hearts heal together. The phone rings in Henry's penthouse. The voice on the other end is distorted, menacing. Your daughter's alone in the storm, powerless. The line goes dead. Henry's world stops. He screams for his men, overturns his desk, and the hunt begins. Before we continue, let me take a second of your time for you to subscribe to our channel and join our amazing family as we go on an amazing journey through these beautiful stories.
Done?
Let's continue. The storm was not just rain. It was rage incarnate. Water hammered the industrial district with punishing force, turning the streets into rivers that swallowed reflections of flickering streetlights. Inside the Starlight Diner, Diana pressed her palm against the small of her back, her spine screaming after 16 hours of serving coffee and forced smiles. The ancient clock above the pie display dragged its hands past midnight. She wanted nothing more than to lock up, walk the 6 blocks to her studio apartment, and collapse into bed before the alarm screamed her awake for the morning shift. A sudden crack of thunder made the diner windows rattle, the neon open sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. And then she saw the child. At first, Diana thought exhaustion was playing tricks on her eyes through the rain-blurred glass. But then lightning tore across the sky, illuminating everything in sharp, merciless detail. The girl was impossibly small, maybe 7 years old, folded into herself on the rain-slicked curb. A bright pink party dress, the kind with layers of tulle and sequins, clung to her tiny frame like a second skin. One foot was bare, the other still wore a muddy ballet flat. The girl's arms wrapped around her knees, her face buried, her shoulders shaking with sobs that Diana could feel rather than hear. Diana's breath caught, her own burdens, the stack of bills marked final notice, the emptiness of her life since the fire, suddenly felt insignificant. Without a second thought, she grabbed her keys and pushed through the door. The bell above announced her exit with a cheerful jingle, absurdly innocent against the violence of the storm. Sweetheart, you can't stay out here. You'll catch your death. The girl's head snapped up, her dark eyes wide with terror so pure it made Diana's chest ache. This wasn't just fear of the storm. This was the kind of fear that came from running, from hiding, from knowing monsters were real. The child tried to stand and immediately crumpled with a cry of pain, her scraped knees giving out beneath her. Diana didn't hesitate. She plunged into the downpour, the cold shocking her system, and scooped the girl into her arms. I've got you now. You're safe. The girl, Rose, she would learn, was chaos wrapped in pink tulle. Her teeth chattered so violently she couldn't form words, only clinging to Diana's neck with a desperation that spoke of abandonment and terror. Diana moved with purpose. She grabbed the worn cardigan she kept on a hook by the kitchen, the last thing she owned from her grandmother, faded but soft, and wrapped it around the trembling body. Then she prepared the richest hot chocolate the diner could offer, piling in marshmallows until they threatened to overflow. Drink slow, honey. Let it warm you up. While Rose took tiny, shaking sips, Diana knelt to assess the damage. Both knees were scraped raw, and on the sole of her bare foot, a thin cut wept blood from stepping on glass. Diana cleaned each wound with gentle hands, her movements muscle memory from the years she'd cared for her dying mother. You ran a long way, didn't you? What scared you so bad? She had just turned to get bandages when Rose's small hand shot out and locked around Diana's wrist. The grip was surprisingly strong, powered by pure panic. Please, the girl whispered, her voice breaking. Don't call the police. Diana froze. That was the first rule of finding a lost child, call the authorities immediately. But the raw terror blazing in Rose's dark eyes wasn't normal. This wasn't a confused toddler who'd wandered from the grocery store. This was someone fleeing from something deadly. Why not, sweetheart? They can help get you home safe. Rose shook her head violently, fresh tears carving paths down her dirt-streaked cheeks. You don't understand. My daddy, My daddy is powerful. If this gets out, if the wrong people see a police report, they'll track me down. They'll find me. Her voice cracked into silence, unable to finish. Someone's hunting me. I escaped. I lost my shoes. I didn't know where else to run. Understanding clicked into place in Diana's mind like puzzle pieces forming a nightmare. The expensive party dress, even destroyed, was clearly custom-made. The delicate gold bracelet on Rose's wrist, engraved with initials, wasn't costume jewelry from a toy store. The absolute conviction in her terror. Powerful and wrong people. This wasn't just some wealthy kid who'd gotten separated at a birthday party. This was something far more dangerous, far more sinister. Okay, Diana said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. No police. But I need to call your daddy. He's probably out of his mind looking for you. Can you give me his number? Rose nodded, relief flooding her small, exhausted face. She recited 10 digits in a trembling whisper, as if sharing a classified code. Diana pulled in a deep breath, her pulse thundering in her ears. She retrieved her battered phone from her apron pocket, the screen spiderwebbed with cracks from too many dropped shifts. Every instinct screamed that this call would shatter the fragile safety of her small, predictable world. The air inside the diner seemed to compress, heavy with an electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Then she dialed. The phone didn't ring. Not even once. It was answered before the first tone could complete, as if someone had been staring at the screen for hours, finger hovering, waiting for this exact moment. Who is this? Not a question. A demand. The voice on the other end was low, controlled fury wrapped around barely restrained violence. The voice of a man who'd built empires on fear and respect, who could end lives with a single word. The kind of voice that made boardrooms fall silent and enemies disappear. And beneath the command, threaded through the rage, was something else entirely. The raw, desperate terror of a father losing his entire world. Rose had always been told she was small for her age. 7 years old, but barely the size of a 5-year-old, her father's men would joke, though never where Henry could hear them. Right now, being small was the only advantage she had. The van slowed for a red light at the intersection of 10th and Commerce, and Rose's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. The man in the passenger seat, the one with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, was scrolling through his phone, laughing at something. The driver drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, humming off-key to a song on the radio. They thought she was just a terrified little girl frozen in the back seat. They had no idea she'd been planning her escape since the moment the van doors had locked. Her tiny fingers found the door handle. One chance. That's all she would get. The light turned green. The driver's foot lifted off the brake, and Rose yanked the handle and threw herself out of the moving van. She hit the pavement hard, her knees exploding in pain as she rolled onto the sidewalk. Someone screamed. Brakes shrieked behind her. But Rose was already running, her party shoes slapping against wet concrete as the first drops of rain began to fall. Get her! The scarred man's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. Rose didn't look back. She plunged into the crush of pedestrians on the crowded downtown street, her small body weaving between businessmen with briefcases and couples holding hands. The city was just beginning its nightly transformation, the golden hour fading into electric blue twilight. Behind her, she heard shouting. Heavy footsteps pounding. They were coming. Rose darted left into an alley, her breath tearing from her lungs in panicked gasps. The narrow passage reeked of garbage and grease, dumpsters casting long shadows in the failing light. She heard the men split up, their voices echoing off brick walls. She went this way. Cut her off at the other end. Her ballet flat caught on something sharp, broken glass, maybe a piece of metal, and the sole tore free. Rose kicked off both shoes and kept running barefoot, the pavement cold and rough beneath her feet. The sky opened up. Rain began to fall in earnest now, not gentle but punishing, as if the storm had been waiting for this exact moment to unleash its fury. Within seconds, Rose's pink party dress was plastered to her skin, the sequins that had sparkled under birthday candles now just dead weight dragging her down. She emerged from the alley onto a wider street, but this one was different. Quieter. The buildings here were warehouses and closed storefronts, the kind of neighborhood that emptied out after 5 o'clock. No crowds to disappear into. No friendly faces to run toward. Terror clawed at her throat. She'd made a mistake. She was more exposed here, more visible. There. A shout from behind her, closer than before. Rose pushed her burning legs harder, her small body cutting through the rain. The storm intensified, turning the world into a watercolor painting where nothing was solid anymore. She couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. Thunder cracked overhead like the earth splitting open. Her foot came down on something sharp, glass, definitely glass this time, and pain lanced up her leg. She stumbled, nearly fell, caught herself against a brick wall. Blood mixed with rainwater, trailing behind her like breadcrumbs for the monsters to follow. She had to keep moving. Her father had taught her that much, even if he'd taught her little else. Never stop. Never give up. Never show weakness. But Rose was just 7 years old, and she was so tired. The industrial district stretched before her like an endless maze of identical buildings and empty streets. She'd lost track of direction, lost track of time. The men's voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, distorted by the storm. Her lungs burned. Her legs trembled. The cut on her foot screamed with every step. And then she saw it, a flicker of warm light cutting through the rain. A sign, glowing like a beacon. Starlight Diner. Rose's legs gave out just as she reached the building. She collapsed onto the curb outside, her body folding in on itself, every muscle surrendering to exhaustion and terror. The overhang provided minimal shelter, but it was something. She wrapped her arms around her knees and let the tears come, mixing with rain and blood and the realization that she had nowhere left to run. The storm raged on, and somewhere in the darkness, the men were still searching. But for now, in this fragile moment beneath a flickering neon sign, Rose was still free. Survival, she was learning, sometimes required courage you didn't know you possessed, and sometimes it required collapsing at exactly the right doorstep, hoping someone inside still believed in saving lost little girls. The warmth of the diner hit Rose like a physical force, the contrast from the storm so sharp it made her gasp. Diana kicked the door shut behind them, the bell's cheerful jingle swallowed by a crack of thunder that shook the windows. She carried Rose straight to the corner booth, the one with the torn red vinyl that nobody ever wanted, and set her down gently, as if she might shatter. "Don't move, sweetheart. I'll be right back." Rose didn't think she could move if she wanted to. Her body had gone rigid, locked in survival mode, every muscle clenched so tight it hurt. She watched through blurred vision as Diana disappeared into the back, returning seconds later with an armful of towels. The waitress moved with quiet efficiency, wrapping the largest towel around Rose's shoulders, then using another to squeeze water from her hair. Her touch was gentle, almost reverent, nothing like the rough handling in the van or the distant pat on the head her father's bodyguards sometimes gave her. "Let's get you warm," Diana murmured, more to herself than to Rose. She grabbed a third towel and carefully dried Rose's arms, her small hands, each finger individually. Rose just stared, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might crack. The shivering had taken over her entire body, violent tremors that she couldn't control even as warmth began to seep back into her limbs. Diana moved to the coffee station and began preparing something, the sounds oddly comforting, liquid pouring, a spoon clinking against ceramic, the soft hiss of steam. She returned with a mug so full of marshmallows that only a thin ring of chocolate was visible around the edges.
"Here.
Hold this with both hands. Let it warm you up from the inside." Rose's fingers wrapped around the mug, and the heat was almost painful against her frozen skin. She took a tiny sip, the sweetness exploding on her tongue, so rich and good it made fresh tears spring to her eyes. At home, her father's chef made hot chocolate from imported cocoa and measured everything precisely. This was nothing like that. This was messy and generous and made with the kind of carelessness that came from actual caring. Diana slid into the booth across from her, not crowding, not demanding. She just sat there, her presence steady and calm. After a moment, she began to hum. Something soft and wordless, a melody that felt like a lullaby without being childish. Rose clutched her hot chocolate and focused on the tune, letting it anchor her to this moment, this safe place that felt impossibly fragile. The shivering began to ease. The violent tremors subsided into occasional shudders. Rose took another sip, then another, the warmth spreading through her chest like liquid sunlight. Diana never stopped humming, never asked questions, never demanded anything. She just existed beside Rose's fear, holding space for it without trying to fix it. Minutes passed. Maybe 5, maybe 15. Time felt elastic in the warm glow of the diner. Finally, Rose's voice emerged, barely above a whisper, cracked and small. "My daddy doesn't know where I am." Diana's humming stopped, but she didn't pounce on the words. She simply nodded, encouraging Rose to continue if she wanted, accepting silence if she didn't. "He's going to be so mad." Rose's hands tightened around the mug until her knuckles went white. "He told me never to go anywhere with strangers. He told me to wait for Thomas. But I got in the van anyway, and now..." Her voice broke completely, dissolving into a sob that came from somewhere deep in her chest. "He's going to be so mad at me." Diana's heart cracked open at those words, at the fear that wasn't about kidnappers or storms, but about disappointing a father who apparently ruled through intimidation even with his own child. She reached across the table slowly, telegraphing her movement, and rested her hand palm up on the scarred formica surface. An offering, not a demand. Rose stared at that hand for a long moment. Then, moving like someone approaching a dangerous animal, she set down her hot chocolate and placed her small, still trembling fingers in Diana's palm. The waitress closed her hand gently around those tiny fingers and held on. "Sweetheart," Diana said softly, her voice carrying absolute conviction, "I don't know your daddy. But I know this. Any father who loves his little girl isn't going to be mad that she survived. He's going to be grateful she's alive." Rose wanted to believe that. She wanted it so badly it hurt worse than her scraped knees or her cut foot. But she'd spent 7 years learning that her father's love came with conditions, with expectations, with the constant weight of never being enough to break through his armor. "You don't understand," Rose whispered. "My daddy doesn't get scared. My daddy doesn't get sad. My daddy just gets mad." Diana squeezed her hand gently and thought about the phone call she was going to have to make. About the man on the other end who'd built a kingdom on fear. About whether a heart that armored could still remember how to break. "Let's find out together," she said. Diana had cleaned Rose's wounds with practiced care, the first aid kit from under the counter spread across the booth's table. The cut on Rose's foot had finally stopped bleeding, covered now with gauze and medical tape. Both scraped knees were bandaged, and Rose had stopped wincing every time she moved. The hot chocolate was gone, leaving only a ring of melted marshmallow at the bottom of the mug. "Better?" Diana asked, packing the supplies back into the kit. Rose nodded, her dark eyes following Diana's every movement with an intensity that seemed far too old for 7 years. The child was studying her, Diana realized, assessing whether this stranger could be trusted with whatever secret she was carrying. "I need to call someone to come get you, sweetheart," Diana said gently, settling back into the booth. "Your daddy, or your mom, or whoever takes care of you. They're probably worried sick." Rose's face crumpled slightly at the mention of her mother, a flash of pain so sharp it made Diana's breath catch. "My mom is dead," Rose said flatly, the words rehearsed, as if she'd had to explain this too many times before. "It's just me and my daddy."
"I'm sorry, honey."
Diana's own losses echoed in her chest, her mother, her father, the fire that had taken everything. "But your daddy needs to know you're safe. What's his name? What should I call him?" Rose was quiet for a long moment, her small fingers pleating the towel still wrapped around her shoulders. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the rain hammering against the windows. "Blackwell. My daddy's name is Henry Blackwell." The world tilted. Diana felt the blood drain from her face, felt her hands begin to tremble where they rested on the table. Henry Blackwell. The name landed like a grenade in the quiet warmth of the diner, obliterating any illusion of simple good Samaritan kindness. Everyone in the city knew that name. You didn't live here without hearing the stories, the whispers, the warnings passed in low voices in bars and on street corners. Henry Blackwell owned half the underground economy. Loan Shark, they called him, but that was almost quaint compared to reality. He controlled the docks, the gambling dens, the protection rackets that kept businesses running or burning. He was the man you paid when the banks wouldn't touch you, the man who collected debts in blood when cash ran short, the man whose name made hardened criminals look over their shoulders. And his daughter was sitting in Diana's booth, wearing pink tulle and bandaged knees, looking at her with desperate, hopeful eyes. Rose Blackwell, Diana repeated, her voice hollow. Her mind raced through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. She could call the police. That was the right thing to do, the legal thing. But Rose had begged her not to, said the wrong people would track her through a police report. What if Henry Blackwell had enemies in the department? What if Diana's attempt to help got this child killed? She could walk away, lock the door, tell Rose she couldn't get involved, leave her on the curb for someone else to find. Self-preservation screamed at her to do exactly that. Diana had survived 3 years alone by keeping her head down, by not making waves, by staying invisible. Getting involved with Henry Blackwell's world was suicide for someone like her, powerless, poor, nobody. But Rose was watching her with those ancient eyes, and Diana saw the exact moment the child register her fear. Saw Rose's small body tense, preparing for rejection, for abandonment, for another adult choosing safety over her. Diana's hands were shaking. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every survival instinct she possessed told her to run. Instead, she reached across the table and took Rose's hand again. "Okay," Diana said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Henry Blackwell, your daddy." She squeezed Rose's fingers gently. "We're going to call him. Together. And we're going to get you home safe." Rose's eyes filled with tears. Not fear this time, but something that looked dangerously close to gratitude. "You're not leaving?"
No, sweetheart.
"I'm not leaving." Diana stood, her legs unsteady, and pulled her cracked phone from her apron pocket. Her hands still trembled as she looked at Rose. "What's his number?" Rose recited 10 digits without hesitation, her voice gaining strength with each number, as if speaking them aloud made her father more real, made rescue more possible. Diana typed them into her phone, each tap feeling like a step closer to a cliff's edge. She stared at the number glowing on her screen. One call. That's all it would take to throw herself into a world she'd spent her entire life avoiding. A world of violence and power and consequences she couldn't begin to imagine. But Rose was 7 years old, and she was terrified, and she was alone. Diana pressed dial. True courage, she thought as the phone began to ring, wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to act despite the terror threatening to choke you. It was standing at the edge of the cliff and jumping anyway, trusting that somehow you'd figure out how to fly on the way down. The call connected before the first ring finished. "Who is this?" The voice turned Diana's blood to ice. But she didn't hang up. She took a breath, looked at Rose's hopeful face, and found her voice. "Mr. Blackwell," she said. "My name is Diana. I'm a waitress at the Starlight Diner on 5th and Morrison." Another breath. "Your daughter is here. She's safe. But she needs you." Henry Blackwell stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, unable to cross the threshold. His men were out there, 20 of them combing every street, every alley, every shadow in this godforsaken city. He'd put $100,000 on the table for information. He'd made calls that would have rival bosses scrambling to help, terrified of what he'd do if they didn't. He'd activated every resource, every contact, every thread of power he'd spent 2 decades weaving into an empire. But none of it brought Rose home. The bedroom mocked him with its perfection. A canopy bed draped in silk, fit for a princess. Shelves lined with dolls still in their boxes, their painted faces staring with lifeless eyes. A closet full of designer dresses organized by color, tags still attached to most of them. A toy chest overflowing with expensive gifts from people trying to curry favor with him, toys Rose had never even opened. Henry finally forced himself inside, each step feeling like walking through concrete. The room smelled like lavender, the housekeeper's doing, not Rose's choice. Nothing in this space was Rose's choice. He'd built her a palace and called it love, never once asking what she actually wanted. His phone buzzed with updates. Nothing. 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 The word repeated like a death knell. Henry sank onto the edge of Rose's bed, his head in his hands. The tattoos covering his arms and chest, symbols of power, of survival, of every battle he'd won, suddenly felt like the markings of a fool. What good was power if he couldn't protect the one person who mattered? What good was an empire if it cost him his daughter? His eye caught on something tucked between the bed and the nightstand. A piece of paper, folded and worn as if it had been handled many times. Henry reached for it with trembling fingers and slowly unfolded what he recognized as one of Rose's drawings from school. The image was simple, rendered in crayon with a child's unsteady hand. Two figures stood on opposite sides of the paper, a little girl in a pink dress on the left, a tall man in a dark suit on the right. The space between them was vast, empty white paper that seemed to stretch like an ocean. At the bottom, in Rose's careful printing, was a title, Close but Far. Something broke inside Henry's chest. Not the clean snap of a bone, but the slow, agonizing crumble of a foundation that had been cracking for years. He stared at the drawing, at the distance his 7-year-old daughter had captured with devastating accuracy, and felt tears burn behind his eyes for the first time since Rose's mother had died.
Victoria.
Her name still hurt to think, even after 7 years. She died bringing Rose into the world, hemorrhaging on a delivery table while Henry paced outside, powerless for the first time in his adult life. He'd held Rose in the hospital, this impossibly tiny thing that had cost him everything, and made a vow, nothing would ever hurt her. He would build walls so high, armor so thick, power so absolute that the world would never dare touch his daughter. But Victoria's last words, whispered through pale lips as her life bled away, echoed now with damning clarity. Don't let fear make you cold to her. Promise me, Henry. Don't let your fear steal her father. He'd promised. God, he'd promised. And then he'd broken that promise every single day for 7 years. Henry had been physically present. He lived in the same house, ate dinner at the same table, saw Rose every morning before her driver took her to school. But he'd never really been there. He'd never asked what she dreamed about, never sat with her while she drew her pictures, never learned what made her laugh or what scared her in the night. He'd confused protection with love, provision with presence, discipline with connection. He'd taught her to be strong when she needed to learn she was loved. He'd taught her to hide fear when she needed to learn it was safe to show it. He'd built a fortress around her and called it parenting, never realizing he'd locked himself outside the walls. The drawing trembled in his hands. Close but far. She'd known. Of course she'd known. Children always knew when they weren't truly seen, when love came with conditions and emotional distance masqueraded as strength. His phone rang, shattering the silence. Henry's heart leaped, desperate, but it was just Martinez with another update. Still nothing. Henry ended the call without speaking, unable to trust his voice. He looked around the bedroom again, seeing it now through Rose's eyes. This wasn't a child's room. This was a showpiece, a display of wealth and taste curated by interior designers who'd never met his daughter. Where were the crayon marks on the walls, the scattered toys, the messy evidence of a child actually living? Where was Rose in any of this? Henry stood and walked to her desk, where a neat stack of schoolwork sat untouched. He'd never looked at it, never asked about her day, never celebrated her small victories or comforted her small defeats. He'd paid for the best private school, the best tutors, the best of everything, and given her nothing of himself. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking. God, Rose, I'm so sorry. The words felt inadequate, microscopic against the weight of 7 years of emotional abandonment. But they were all he had. That and the crushing realization that if he got his daughter back, when he got her back, everything had to change. Presence without emotional availability was just another form of absence. He'd been absent for Rose's entire life, and now she was gone, lost somewhere in the storm, probably terrified and alone. And if he found her when he found her, he'd have to learn how to be more than just the man who kept her safe. He'd have to learn how to be her father. Diana found a comb in the diner's small employee bathroom, along with a hair tie that looked reasonably clean. Rose sat perfectly still in the booth, her back straight, hands folded in her lap like she'd been trained for formal photographs. The posture made Diana's heart ache. No 7-year-old should sit that rigidly, that careful not to take up space. "Can I fix your hair, sweetheart?" Diana asked, sliding into the booth beside her. "It'll feel better once it's not all tangled." Rose nodded without speaking, and Diana began working the comb gently through the damp curls, starting at the ends the way her own mother had taught her. Rose flinched at the first touch, then slowly relaxed as Diana's movements stayed patient, careful never to pull too hard. "You have beautiful hair," Diana said softly, working through a particularly stubborn knot. "Does someone usually help you with it?" "My nanny used to," Rose said quietly. "But she quit 6 months ago. Now the housekeeper does it, but she's always in a hurry." Diana's hands paused momentarily before continuing their gentle work. A housekeeper doing a child's hair in a rush, not a mother, not even a father. "What about your daddy? Does he ever do your hair?"